Welcome. You're listening to WNHHLP 103.5 FM, New Haven's home for community radio. I'm Mubarakah Ibrahim, and this is Mornings with Mubarakah, where we talk about national issues on a local level through a lens of diversity. Welcome to the show on this beautiful Wednesday morning. It's Wednesday because this is your Wednesday morning voice. If you are tuning in to us, then know that we are a little bit of everywhere. We are on 103.5 FM on your radio dial in New Haven, Connecticut, streaming live on TuneIn Radio, as well as the New Haven Independent Facebook page and Periscope page and Stream Me and a couple of other places. So, hey, social media, how you doing? I want to welcome you to the show today. Today, we are going to have a chat back show. So I'd love for you to take the opportunity to join the conversation and to give me a call. I'll share the number with you in a little bit. But what I wanted to say today is Happy Black History Month. It is Black History Month in the United States of America, if you're listening from someplace else. So it is an entire month in which is recognized the contributions of African Americans to American history. But we are going to talk about a few things. So there are several, curiosities that people pose to me, and a couple that I pose to other people as well, such as why is Black History Month the shortest month of the year? So February is the only month in the entire calendar that has less than 30 days. So why was it chosen for Black History Month? We're going to talk about that. The second thing is that now that we're in 2020 and we have catchphrases like that diaspora, is Black History Month specifically for African Americans descended of slaves, or are we spreading it out a little bit? Are we looking at other descendants of Africans? So we're going to talk about that as well. We're also going to talk about it from a couple of different perspectives, right? So I'm going to talk about it from my perspective. We have Ayanna joining us in a minute, and she's going to talk about it from her perspective. We're two different generations, so it's going to be interesting to talk about that. But I would love to hear from you when we talk about what exactly Black History Month means and how we are going to, and how do we celebrate it or recognize it in any way. So the interesting thing is, as we talk about Black history, and we talk about Black history in America, when we talk about Black history, we talk about Black history in America, how much of it do we really know? So I did a couple of things so that I can be completely transparent about myself, right? I actually did not research a whole bunch of Black history facts that I didn't know, right? I researched some on the idea of Black History Month and how it started and things like that. But I didn't because I didn't want to really convolute, I would say, what I was actually taught in school. So when I went to high school, my first 2 years in high school in 9th and 10th grade was inside of a mostly white school. So a large part of my childhood, I actually grew up in Massachusetts. And when I went to high school, I remember very clearly that there were 1,100 students inside of this school. And there was 9 Blacks and 15 Puerto Ricans. That is what we would say, right? To be honest, hopefully I'm not offending anybody, but I'm not sure if all of the Hispanics were Puerto Rican, but we assumed they were. So that is how white my high school was. And it wasn't until I moved to New Haven for 11th and 12th grade and the dynamics of where I went to school literally got flipped on its head. So in New Haven, I went to Cooperative Arts and Humanities High School. Before it was this gorgeous, beautiful thing that they have downtown. We were on Orange Street and we had a minimal building. Now Co-op has like dance studios and music recording studios and all these other things to support artistry among young people, which is awesome. But When I went to co-op, the dynamics literally switched, where it was a majority Black and Hispanic high school. If I remember correctly, I can only think of 2 white students that was actually in my classes, that meaning like that I interact. It may have been maybe some 9th graders or 10th graders, but in 11th and 12th grade, I can remember 1 white female and 1 white male that even was in 11th or 12th grade. So very, very different. But here is the interesting thing. The interesting thing is when I did get to, when I did come to New Haven, and I realized that when I came to New Haven, and they actually celebrated Black History Month, I realized that at my previous school, we never celebrated Black History Month. Like the 2 years that I went to that school, I don't remember it even being mentioned that, oh, it's Black History Month. Let's learn about, you know, what Black people did. I do remember specifically talking about Martin Luther King on Martin Luther King Day. We did not have the day off. So you're talking, what is this, 25 years ago. We did not have the day off. It was a day that we were in school. And we did, in a couple of classes, talk about Martin Luther King. Sort of kind of like, this is who he was, this is what he fought for, that kind of stuff. But there was no, and so that's really interesting. And I guess that goes to the point, kind of like, with Black History Month, do white children learn about Black history during Black History Month if there is no significant Black students in the school? I would be very curious to know that. So if you grew up in a white community or went to a mostly white high school, then I would be interested in you calling in and letting me know what did you actually do things for Black History Month? So here are some really interesting facts about Black History Month. So if you did not know, you want to listen up. If you've always wondered how Black History Month came along and why we actually celebrate it why do we celebrate it in February? So Black History Month, we can actually thank Carter G. Woodson. So Carter G. Woodson was a very interesting and inspiring person if you've never heard of him. He was actually the second person, he was the second Black person to get a degree from Harvard University. And that was quite a feat because he was the son of former slaves. And so in 1875, so he was born in 1875 in West Virginia. Both of his parents were former slaves, but they were really, really adamant that he get an education. And so although he worked in the coal mines when he was a teenager, when he was 20, he actually went to high school. And that's really interesting because now we think about 20-year-olds like they're in college and they should be starting their life, but he went to high school at 20. Excuse me. And then he graduated from Harvard University with a doctorate. He was the second African-American to ever graduate from Harvard with a doctorate, and he had a career in education. So serving students and principals of schools, and he had a really strong belief in education, particularly education for African Americans. One of the things that he noticed as he went through the school system, both in colleges and looking at how students are taught, is the lack of education of the contributions of African Americans to American history. And when there was education, it was more of a miseducation. It was a very strong history of Black people being slaves and a lot of myths and things like that around African Americans. So that really gave him a passion for expanding knowledge, true information about African Americans' contribution to America. And so he published a book called The Miseducation of the Negro. So I've heard people talk about this book a lot. I have to admit that I've never actually read it. But if you are, if you've read The Miseducation of Negro, we're talking about the same person. When he when he wanted to really expand what people knew about the contribution of African Americans, he actually went to a fair. It was an African American fair, and when he went to this fair, he had a table that gave people educations of the contributions of African Americans to America. And his first goal, which is really interesting, we celebrate in February because initially it was not African American month, it was actually African American week. So his initial advocacy is for us to take 1 week of every year and specifically talk about the contributions of African Americans to America. And it was chosen to be in February because it coincides with Abraham Lincoln's birthday and Frederick Douglass's birthday. So, that is a very interesting point. The reason why we do it in February is because during that time, this is the 1920s. I think I failed to mention that. So, 1920s. He designated a week in February when he thought which week it should be. He chose the week because the Republicans, and in the 1920s, most African Americans were Republicans. We'll talk about that on another show. But the Republicans celebrated Abraham Lincoln's birthday, which was February 12th. And it's also, the 14th is actually Frederick Douglass's birthday. So actually Frederick Douglass' birthday is coming up on Friday. And he wanted to harness the energy behind both of these pre-existing celebrations. So Republicans and African Americans were already celebrating these days, already doing things around them. And so he decided to, let's just make it a whole week and let's talk about Black people, talk about the Negro as they were referred to as at the time. His goal was to improve self-confidence for the African American community so that people would know that they contributed to the success of America and it wouldn't be overlooked because it was something that was hard-earned, hard-worked. In the 1920s, so interesting, so the 1920s became the decade of the new Negro. That is what is referred to because of the proud World War I generation. So African Americans, Negroes, quote unquote, actually was considered like it was a time where people were proud of their heritage, proud that we were a part of the America that won World War I. So it was actually a really good time to promote this as a celebration. So at what point did we go from a week to a year? So here's the really interesting thing about this particular history. I am 43 years old. I was born and raised in America. I have gone through several school systems in several different states throughout my educational experience, including college and getting a college degree. And I literally was never taught this, like why Black History Month is actually in February and who started it. Really interesting. So it wasn't until, so his dream, Woodson's dream was for us to celebrate African American Year, right? And I'm gonna talk about that later because I think it was kind of realized last year. In 1965, a cultural activist named Frederick Hammurabi began a month-long celebration. So it did not become a month, Black History Month, until 1965. So in 1965, Hammurabi decided that okay, we have gotten a lot of traction around celebrating African History Week. We should extend it to an entire month. So I would be really interested to know, one, were you told this much history around African American History Month? If you want to join the conversation, you can give me a call at 203-951-9193. Join the conversation, chat back, and let me know whether or not this is something that you knew. Like, how much about Black history are we taught just in the month of February, right? So we're talking about not just that we are taught Black history at home, but we're talking in general inside of this school system. When we think of Black history, in a way of it being incorporated into our kind of like regular, everyday kind of information, if we are taught about it in this way, where are we failing where we still need a Black History Month? So I would be really interested in getting your feedback around whether or not we're actually taught Black history, even if it's just in February, right? We know that it's, for most school systems, it's not taught throughout the entire school year, but you know, at least in February, we should have some kind of I would say additional things added into our curriculum, right? So it would be very interesting for us to, it would be very interesting for me to hear kind of like, what are your perspectives when it comes to Black history? Like, is it something that you're taught, or is it something that you go about and you learn on your own, in your own way? Right? So that would be great if you would give me a call and let me know. So let's talk a little bit about how Black history turned from a week to a month, right? So here's the interesting thing. So it began as a time for people to really reflect on the contributions of African Americans. And I posed a question a little while ago, and I said, like, is this something that is for the diaspora, right? So I had different types of answers when I posed this question on my Facebook group. Some people were saying, no, absolutely not. It is specifically for African Americans, descendant of American slaves. Some people were like, oh, yes, now I tell everybody that it is for them, everybody that's in the diaspora. So that includes Afro-Latinas, Latinos. It includes people who are African immigrants. It includes anybody who can trace part of their lineage back to Africa. So I would say personally, I don't think that I would agree with that. I don't think I would agree with that. The reason why I would not agree with that is that that was certainly not the intention or purpose of Black History Month. So in 1976, which was 26 years after Woodson's death, the Association for the Study of Negro Life and History officially shifted the celebration from a week to a month. The shift happened during the celebration of the country's bicentennial. So when America's bicentennial year happened, they were like, okay, this is the time for us to also extend that, that celebration from just 1 week to a month officially, right? So prior to that, we already started to celebrate that difference, that shift. So people were already celebrating it for an entire month. Welcome, Ayanna. Come join me. Ayanna Bakiriddin is joining me. People may know her as my daughter-in-law. I know her as the next generation.
Yeah.
The next generation. So we are actually talking about how Black History Month shifted from just 1 week to an entire month. And some of the things that I was talking about is how when I went to a mostly white school, like Black History Month was like literally never mentioned, as opposed to when I went to a majority Black school, that it was something that was actually recognized throughout the whole month. Now, I am a whole generation behind, in front of you. So we're talking 25 years ago. You went to a majority Black high school, right?
No, not high school. I went to majority Black, like elementary and middle school. And then I didn't have my first white teacher until I went to high school.
Oh, really?
Yeah. But my high school is really mixed. Like, I had Black teachers, I had white teachers, Spanish, Asian.
Did y'all do a special curriculum during Black History Month? Or was it just like, hey, it's Black History Month, now go do your algebra?
In high school, not really. It wasn't, because we did it so much in elementary and middle school. Like, it was big when I was like little. But once I got to high school, it was kind of like, yeah, like, oh, it's Black History Month. You know, you do a couple lessons in history, but other than that, like, you do a regular work.
Okay, so what did you do in elementary and?
Oh my God, my school was so Black. Because I went to a school literally named after Marcus Garvey. So
oh yeah, well they're definitely going to celebrate Black History.
We did everything. We used to do like celebrations. We used to have like you could dress up as a figure from anybody from Black History Month. We would do like we do the assemblies where we would just sit and talk and watch movies like documentaries on Malcolm X or Rosa Parks and Martin Luther King Jr. and stuff like that. It was like a big thing, especially in middle and
throughout the entire month, y'all was doing stuff.
We was doing stuff all the time.
Did they save all Black history stuff during that month, or did they incorporate it into the curriculum at any other time, or it was kind of like, oh, we'll just wait till Black History Month?
No, so because I went to a school with so many Black teachers, we learned about it all year. Especially in middle school, we definitely learned about it all year, but Black History Month was when we had like the festival and we had the dressing up and all the extra stuff. But I was learning about Black history all throughout my like elementary and junior high school career.
Okay, and when you got to high school, it was just
kind of like normal. It was like, you know, if you have a history, well, everybody had to have a history class, but when you have history, you would talk about it then, but you wasn't talking about it in like math and science and gym and stuff like that. But
they incorporated it into history.
Yeah. A bit. I mean, it made me like slavery, but but I had learned so much already about like other stuff besides that.
Yeah.
That it wasn't that big a deal to me. But
when we so one of the things that I was talking about earlier was that it wasn't until 1976, which is actually the year that I was born, that we shifted officially from Black History Week, because it actually started as a week, to Black History Month. And when that shift happened, they decided to actually keep it in February because there was a lot of significant days in February. So we talked about earlier that Republicans, particularly Black Republicans, already celebrated Abraham Lincoln's birthday. That was the 13th of February. They celebrate Frederick Douglass' birthday, which was the 14th. I'm sorry, Abraham Lincoln's was the 12th. Frederick Douglass was the 14th. W.E.B. Du Bois, he was a civil rights leader and founder of the National Association for Advancement of Colored People. He was born in February. The 15th Amendment was passed, granting African Americans the right to vote. What happened in February? The African American U.S. Senator, the first African-American U.S. Senator, took his oath of office in February, and the NAACP was founded in February. So because of all of these benchmarks for African-Americans that continue to happen in February, they decided to keep the month in February. So that answers the question. Why is Black History Month the shortest month of the year? It's coincidental, apparently. Yeah. Apparently. I have always wondered, let me ask, especially since you did not, that you wasn't here at the beginning of the show, were you ever taught how Black History Month started? Or why it was in February?
Never.
Never. Me either.
It just
That's
was
what I'm
in
saying.
February.
Yeah, I mean, and nobody could ever answer the question like why it was in February. Okay, we are breaking this tradition. Tell people why Black History
I
Month
didn't
is
know
in
that. You
February.
telling me all this stuff. I'm like, oh, nice.
I just found out 48 hours ago.
Yeah, I didn't know that.
So we are breaking the tradition. Tell people why Black History Month is in
For
February.
For real.
So if you are just tuning in, you're listening to WNHHLP 103.5 FM, New Haven's home for community radio. I'm Mubarakah Ibrahim, and you're listening to Mornings with Mubarakah, where we are talking about the history of Black History Month and why we have it and who's it for. And I have joining me Ayanna Bakiriddin, who is giving us a perspective from a different generation. I think that's really important because I realize that I may think things that don't exist anymore. So. Like, for example, the idea that it is now for the diaspora, right? So that term literally did not, well, it may have existed in the dictionary, but it was something that we did not say when I was in high school. So, do you think it's for the diaspora?
Yes and no. I think it's just now becoming for the diaspora just because we're just now branching outside of learning about only slavery, only Malcolm X, only Rosa Parks. We're also learning about like African history. So that's their history as well. So that's why I would say that it's also a part of it. But I would say the beginnings of Black History Month is, and the intentions was for African Americans.
African American descendants of slaves.
Yeah, for us to learn our history and to learn where we come from, not in America, but also outside of it being in America. But I think we just recently started learning about what happened outside of America.
I think that I do agree with you that it's something that we never was really taught of, kind of like, oh, Haitians used to be slaves too, and Jamaicans used to be slaves. I'm trying to think of if I ever was told that when I was younger. I don't think that I would ever even like we never even talked about or considered the history of blacks in the Caribbean or blacks in Europe. I don't think that we've ever talked about or considered kind of like their history.
Yeah.
I was watching an interview with some black actors from the UK. I do not remember their name. I'm sure you probably would know their name. the one that plays in Star Wars.
Star Wars? Oh, dang.
So
it'll come to me.
So the interesting thing that it was him and it was
John Boyega. That's the name.
Okay, it was him and it was a couple of other Black UK actors, and they were talking about when they began to learn about the discrimination of Black people in America. They were just like, oh, it's just like being in the UK. And I was like, So they were saying that, people think that because they're from the UK that they cannot relate to the experience of injustice and racism and things like that. But the histories and the condition of Black people in both places are actually
very
parallel.
Similar,
yeah. So that's interesting. So when we talk about just Black people inside of the diaspora, do you feel in your generation that Black people who are not descended from slaves, so Black Americans, which is different, so I'm making a very clear distinction so everybody understands. African American descendants from slaves.
Okay.
Versus Black people, which Black people to me is synonymous with the diaspora.
Yeah.
That's what I would consider it. Do you think that people inside of the diaspora actually take in this generation, take Black History Month as something for them? Or is it something that only African Americans actually say, hey, it's Black History Month?
I think now because of the internet and because people are actually learning, because like you said, you was watching the documentary and the guys from the UK, they didn't even know like African American history in America, like how Black people are treated here. So I think because now we have the internet and we have people kind of like schooling each other and things like that, they're kind of waking up and being like, wow, you know. So I think that they are participating because they now have the knowledge and they now know like this is what happened, especially my generation. Especially
So participating meaning learning about African American history, or participating meaning, hey, this is the significant Jamaicans who contribute to Jamaican history, or Haitians who contribute. So both ways?
Yeah, there are people that are making like this girl makes like something called Fast Black History on TikTok, and she makes these really quick videos, and she does like a different person from, I guess, Black history, whatever. And so she does like
from the diaspora,
not just from African American Black history. So she does like she does people from different countries and everything. So I think people are starting to branch out and realize that it's more than just like, okay, hey, Black people were slaves and Martin Luther King got shot, and like you know what I mean? Like that's all we ever were taught. And now that we're able to, because we have the knowledge to branch out and we have the internet to spread that knowledge, I think people from the diaspora are starting to participate more, because they're like, you know what, our history is also your history, so we're all kind of like in this together. So I think people are participating a lot more.
So that's a shift for the new generation.
That's definitely mine. Yeah, I have African friends who are like super proud of Black History Month.
Oh, really? Yeah. Okay. See, that's a shift for a new generation, because my generation is like, it's just Black African Americans that's descended from slaves.
Because that's all it was when you guys were coming up. But now it's for everybody. So.
This is true. Yeah. So new generation is for new generation is for the diaspora. Old generation is like African Americans. Which is okay. Yeah. Everything evolves. When we so one of the things that I thought would be interesting is, how big should African American History Month be? Like, we do celebrate it and recognize it in schools. Should we get at least a couple days off?
Oh, from work?
Do you think that it's something that, besides spreading information about it, are people actually doing things or engaging in things?
Like activities?
Yeah.
I don't know. I don't think, I've never, outside of school, went to like a Black History Month celebration.
No.
I mean, I guess maybe in certain communities, maybe they do it. Like, I guess it depends on how Black you are. Honestly, I don't know. Because sometimes people do stuff like that. Like, I know Black people who are like really Black, and they would do stuff like that, and they'll celebrate Kwanzaa and stuff like they're really Black. But for the most part, outside of like school,
if they're really Black, they celebrate Kwanzaa.
No, I mean you know what I mean.
We only half Black.
Really like Afrocentric type of people.
Yeah, I know.
I don't know. I don't think it's ever been celebrated to. There's no like Black History Month parade, like the Christmas parade or something, Thanksgiving parade. Like, so I don't know. I don't think people really do anything outside of just spreading information and learning, and taking the time to recognize the people that came before us. But
I think that the interesting thing that I find is that when I talk to people, and we have this conversation sometime about whether or not we still need a Black History Month with the internet, and we're learning stuff all the time. But then I'm always reminded that there are communities, particularly white and non-people of color communities, that literally do not know about Black history. So my youngest son is in college. He's in college in Maine. And he was telling us that when he had a class, and there was like 15 to 18 students in this class, and the teacher asked the class, like, who knew who Maya Angelou was? And no one raised their hand. She even asked who knew who Martin Luther King was, and he said only 3 people raised their hand. So like, and that was like mind blown to me. Like, we actually have a holiday around Martin Luther King, and you don't know who he is.
I believe it.
So it just shows how that we've come far, but we certainly have not come far enough.
Yeah.
Because there are white communities that literally don't know the contribution of African Americans to America.
Mhm.
So, pop quiz time.
Lord.
And I did not do additional research for myself because I wanted to actually be vulnerable, see how I even need to learn more. Who were some of the that you were taught kind of like people who contributed to American history that, you know, besides like Martin Luther King, Malcolm X, these people like that? Okay, so you can't mention Harriet Tubman, you can't mention Rosa Parks, Martin Luther King,
No,
Malcolm X. Contributions to African American contributions.
Shirley Chisholm.
Shirley Chisholm, what did she do?
What did she do? Listen, this was a long time ago, okay?
This
is a long time ago.
I remember that the Statue of Liberty is actually modeled off of a black woman.
Is it really?
Yep.
Okay.
Statue of Liberty, a black French woman, I believe.
Modeled after a black.
Yeah,
French
so
woman.
she was shaped. So the model for the Statue of Liberty was actually a black woman.
So they just put a white face on it.
Maybe that's the way she looked.
She didn't look like that. She did not look like that.
That's what I read. So the other thing that I did not know is that well, you know, I was told that I'm actually not quite sure is like the light bulb, the first light bulb was actually created by a black man.
I read that.
And then it was taken by Edison. He was actually the second person.
No,
the second person.
I read that.
So that is something else. Okay, give me another Black history fact.
And I told her before I came on here that I didn't want to be tested. Okay? I haven't been in school in a while.
That's okay. This is supposed to be. Don't worry about it. I'm like step 2. Another Black history fact.
Sojourner Truth.
Sojourner Truth. What does Sojourner Truth do?
Is she free slaves too?
Okay. All right. The first person to do a heart transplant was a black doctor.
Okay.
Madam C.J. Walker.
Oh yeah.
Yep. Yeah. She was the first self-made black woman millionaire.
I also read that the first. I just read that this morning. The first person to do a successful transplant for like a deaf person so that they could hear was a black man. I forgot his name. It was very recent too, obviously. But.
Okay. We know what's his name? The one we uninvited that we took his card. What's his name?
We took his card?
We took his card. He worked for Trump. He separated the twins, the conjoined twins. He was the first person to successfully separate conjoined. He ran for president. Ben Carson.
I'm like, yes. Wait.
We will recognize, we're going to leave out the other stuff, but we will recognize him for his good. He was actually a really, really good neurosurgeon, and he was the first person to successfully separate conjoined twins that was conjoined at the head. I believe so. I would include him as the and of course Barack Obama. President Barack Obama was the first recognized black president. Because apparently we had a couple of previous presidents who had black parents, but they were white passing, and nobody ever knew. And we didn't know this until Barack Obama became president, and people were like, but such and such grandmother was black. So they were white passing, they didn't recognize it, but that's okay. So Barack Obama was definitely the first.
Michelle Obama, first black first lady.
Right. First black first lady. She was like, I think officially the first black first lady.
Yeah.
Shirley Chisholm actually was the first black woman to run for president. She actually put her bid in for president. Yes, I read that as well. I read that as well. She actually put her bid in for president, and she actually ran for president. Obviously, she didn't win, but she actually ran for president. So those are some really actually. I'm gonna like after the show. I wanted to really be honest about even as an African American, how little we're taught about
Yeah,
our
that's
history.
true.
And so that's the reason why it was even a plot twist for myself. But I am going to be posting a whole bunch of Black history facts after this show on my social media, so so we can both learn together. But the important thing, I think the most important thing that I learned is why Black History Month is in February. I'm really excited about that knowledge.
I did not know that. Everybody assumed that it was like, oh, white people just gave us the shortest month of the year.
Yeah, but
just cause.
Yeah, it'd be your own people. No, I'm just joking.
But it's more to it. It's coincidental.
I'm just joking.
I always thought that was a bit of a stretch. But...
It'd be your own people. No. So apparently we have a lot of significant days in February, so that's why it is actually in February. I've heard a lot of different reasons why it was in February. Somebody said to me once that the reason why it was in February is because it's cold in February, and so that way Black people won't act up.
Okay, that's
my radio show. I can say what I want.
Oh my gosh.
That was totally made up. That was totally made up because it's only cold in the Northeast. No, it's not cold in other places in the world. So, interesting. Anyway, so, so now that you're going to be a mama, what will you do? Do you think that you will celebrate Black History Month in any way with your children?
I never thought about that. I definitely would take the time to teach them more than I learned. And then I also need to learn, so that would be like great for both of us because I plan on homeschooling my kids. So I never really thought about that. That'd be interesting if I actually did like celebrations and.
If you had, if you could change something in the way that kids learn about Black history, what would it be?
I think I would do more hands-on stuff, like what I did when I was a kid. Like kids don't really do that stuff anymore. Like dressing up as your favorite character, having to learn a lot about them and then present it and all that kind of stuff. I don't know if schools still do that, but that was a big impact on me because we could pick anybody. I remember I was in kindergarten. It was the first time I ever did it, and I picked my grandmother. So I dressed up like my grandmother, and like you know what I mean. Like you could do stuff like that, even people within your own family that influence you and things like that. And I learned a lot about my grandmother and all this kind of stuff that she did. I mean, not that she was like a huge figure or anything, but just in my life. So stuff like that, I think is beneficial because kids really learn through that, and kids learn through hands-on activities, and you know they have fun with it as well. So and it really sticks with them. So I think I would do stuff like that. That's actually really interesting. I never really thought about that before.
If I can change anything about the way that Black History Month is celebrated, I would prefer that we go pre-slavery. Yeah. Because I think that when we talk about Black history, I think that we need to expand the definition of Black history. So if we said it was Black American History Month, then we're just talking about from the time we set foot on the shore. But if we want to truly do Black history and make it all encompassing, we have to recognize that slavery is not the start of Black people, it's the interruption of Black excellence. So like we have to really expand beyond that. So that is our show for the day. Do you have any parting words that you'd like to leave people with?
If they're not learning it in school, teach your kids at home.
Absolutely.
They'll learn it, and they'll probably take it better from you than you would from that school.
You know what? One quick thing was that Woodson, who initially started Black History Week, his goal was that we would have a Black History Year. Okay. And when I thought about that, I said, maybe his goal was realized last year because it was the year of the return. Black people were completely engulfed in connecting with their history, connecting with stories of being Black, their Blackness before they came to America, and actually returning to the motherland. They made billions of dollars in the economy of that, in certain nations in Africa, just with Black people trying to return. So here we are, some 100 years later, that His
just
dream
now.
may have been realized.
Right.
Took us a while.
I think from now on, Black people are definitely going to step it up. It's going to become way more than just a month.
Yeah, and
We
actually
tired.
having stuff.
We
Yeah.
tired as we need.
Yeah.
It's like we got to do more.
Yeah. This is the month that's going to start. We got to do. I mean, if we could have birthday months for
Right.
just one person, then we certainly need to have it
Have
for
a
more than
year
just for
for
an entire
Yeah.
entire demographic. I want to thank you for joining me. You've been listening to WNHHLP 103.5 FM, New Haven's home for community radio. This is Mubarakah Ibrahim, and this has been Mornings with Mubarakah on WNHH, also the New Haven Independent.org, and TuneIn Radio. If you miss any part of this show, you can actually catch our show archived on iTunes, SoundCloud. Go to NewHavenIndependent.org and you can hear it live every Wednesday there, or go to the New Haven Independent Facebook page and scroll the list, find the Mornings with Mubarakah show, and you can go back and watch and listen. We're a little bit of everywhere. We got technology and social media. So until next week, be a voice and not an echo.